Let me know what you guys hear. Let's see out here. We are now live on the Into the Impossible podcast. I am going to begin by welcoming everybody to the Into the Impossible podcast, and to celebrate coming up on almost 100 episodes. We are, I believe, at 98 currently now. I'm going to play a theme song written by a friend of mine who goes by the moniker Yeti Tears, and this is Miguel, and he made this lovely song. So let's see if we can hear it. So that is my cool new addition, an early Hanukkah present from me from my friend Mr. Miguel at Yeti Tears. He's a phenomenal musician. I want to thank him for doing that. We're getting all sorts of cool stuff happening on the podcast. We'll talk about that later. But today I'm super excited to talk to these two gentlemen astronomers who have written a wonderful book called The Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook. I thought this was Bernie Sanders' science policy platform, but actually, no, it is about what I study. And I want to introduce the two authors, two doctors, including Professor Geraint Lewis, who is there. Hello, Geraint. Say hello to the Into the Impossible audience of dozens.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
And then his counterpart, Luke Barnes, Dr. Luke Barnes, who is an astronomer. Also, you guys are joining us bright and early or extremely late in Australia? What is it? What time is it now?
9 in the morning.
9 a.m.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's pretty relaxing, but it's a day ahead, so you can tell me what's happening in advance.
Yeah, tomorrow's pretty nice.
Tomorrow's pretty. What are the lottery numbers I should play tomorrow? So we're going to be talking, as I said, about this phenomenal book called The Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook, with encomia presented by none other than people such as Sean Carroll, Dr. Sean Carroll, and Dr. Primavadia Narjan, who's known as Priya to those who love her at Yale University. And she and Sean provide a deep, loving, and raving encomia for your fine book. I want to start by asking you, you won't know this, I don't think you know this, but the person who previously occupied the very space that I'm speaking to you from as we speak is Dr. Jeff Burbidge. Now, if there was ever a cosmic revolutionary, it was Jeff Burbidge. You mentioned him in the book. And of course, he had many ideas outside the mainstream of cosmology that I want to get into. But first, I wanted to just bid you greetings from Jeff Burbidge's office. Behind me, over my shoulder, you see a picture taken by his wife. That's Margaret Burbidge, who is one of the most towering astronomers of the previous generation. She passed away this year earlier in 2020 at the ripe old age of 100. She was not as revolutionary as her husband and partner, Jeff Burbidge, but also much more interested in sort of, I would say, orthodox ideas. But I first want to ask you, why bother writing about the ways the Big Bang could be wrong when we each probably get a fair number of emails every day stating and attesting to a previously undiscovered theory of the universe? Why do we need a book about how to overcome the Big Bang?
Well, precisely for that reason that you just said. Luke and I give a lot of public talks in astronomy and cosmology. And after the talk, as you know, you get lots of great questions, especially from the kids. But in the audience, always somewhere at the back, there's a retired gentleman. They're normally a man. They're normally an engineer. And they basically think that we're wrong, that they don't like this notion of a universe that was born 14 billion years ago, that's expanding, etc. And they know the truth, right? They have the right idea. They know where we've gone wrong and how to put it right. But they want to know why don't astronomers, cosmologists listen to them? So we actually got tired of answering the same questions over and over again. So we thought we'd lay out in book form what we thought the process you would have to take to really overthrow the Big Bang.
And Luke, what was in it for you? I would worry if I was a younger person in my career that I might get tainted with the stench of revolution in the air. What gave you the courage to go, as we say, into the impossible and co-author such a marvelous little book?
Well, actually, to be honest, this one's nothing compared to our last book, Unfortunate Universe, but we can talk about that another time. So as Geraint said, we kept getting emails from people and questions from people telling us how to do our job. And we kept, if you can find the time to reply, you send very similar emails every time. It's, thank you, but you have to explain more than one bit of information in order to have a successful model. Thank you, but when you say, I know my idea is right, I just need some help with the mathematics, what that means is you don't know whether your idea is right because you haven't predicted anything yet. And after you've sort of given those sorts of replies a whole bunch of times, there's the idea of a book there that instead of sending that same email again, we can just say, hey, why don't you go and buy our book?
Yes, of course. That's always something that I love it when authors are interviewed on podcasts, and you probably had this happen on many of your podcast interviewers, but they say, can you tell us the thesis of your book, chapter by chapter summary, and basically save our customers, our listeners, the trouble of buying your book. But I agree. I get a lot of emails about that. Even today, I've received over 3 emails about new theories of everything or theories of the Big Bang being wrong. And it can be proven without any math. And if I do, they will not only share the second authorship, but they will also share some of the Nobel Prize that is won from their new discovery. And I'm sure you get that a lot. And speaking of Nobel Prizes, so my audience out there, I have the opportunity to have on Frank Wilczek, who won the Nobel Prize in 2004, along with his colleagues Gross and Pulitzer. But I will only have this as a live stream if you, my audience, can help get to 15,000 subscribers. We are now at 14,900 or so. So please share the wealth, spread it around so that Luke and Geraint can be sandwiched between Shelley Glashow, my previous interview, and Frank Wilczek. And hopefully
Nice.
They too will benefit from this very golden medallion that we love and know. So please, yes, I want to do a live chat, but only if we hit 15,000 subscribers by 9 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. Anyway, boys, back to you. This book is awesome because it presents things in a respectful way. You don't insult the people that want to come up with new ideas. You don't make fun of them. You merely provide, I would say, a rubric. And at the end of the hour, we'll go through a rubric of alternate models to the Big Bang, which is the only lacuna in this book, is that you didn't really go through and harpoon like all these different models of the universe, of which there are many, and some of which I've had guests espouse on my own show, and will indeed in the future when I have on more guests such as Garrett Lisi, who's got a model of the universe as a deformed Lie group. But I want to start with something I didn't know, which you alerted me to in this book, and I always love learning things whenever I read books like this. But it was about the so-called theoretical virtues. And you guys talk about the theoretical virtues. And this is in a paper, which I'll put in the show notes, by Michael Keyes. Is that how you say it? Michael Keyes?
Yeah.
And he has this paper, which is kind of an update to like Thomas Kuhn or Karl Popper. But it really, I'm going to put it up on the screen. And it's the different virtues that a theory must have. And I want to go over it and kind of ask you guys on the scorecard, where do you rank the Big Bang? In other words, where would you rank the Big Bang according to this rubric of scoring possibilities to eliminate, to weed out, or as my friend and I, Eric Weinstein, have been talking about, a sieve to assay what is valuable about a particular model, be it theory of everything or an alternate to the Big Bang. So the first evidential virtue, the first of the 12 virtues, is evidential accuracy. A theory fits the empirical evidence well, regardless of causal claim. How would you say, Luke, that the Big Bang theory matches up on that scale of actually matching up well with empirical evidence? The Big Bang itself being normally associated with a singularity in the early universe.
Well, that's a distinction that we make carefully in the book. There's the Big Bang as that moment, supposedly, when everything was compressed into a single point and massive, whatever. And then there's what actually cosmologists call the Big Bang Theory, which is in the past, the universe was hotter and denser than today. And whether Well, the thing we're really testing is that second idea. Whether the first one is true is another question entirely. But in terms of the data, so we lay out in the book sort of 6 pieces of evidence that we think the Big Bang handles quite well. And certainly it handles well enough that someone with a new idea out there had better handle it at least as well as the Big Bang. Because if you're not, that's how you buy your ticket to this show. Here's the things that you can explain. Beyond that, if you can do better on other areas, then that's great. So, for example, the relationship between redshift and distance. The fact that we see redshifted galaxies everywhere in the universe, and the redshift increases the further away that you look, is something that's very nicely explained by the Big Bang Theory. The spectrum of the cosmic microwave background. There was a time when everything in the universe was at the same temperature. At some point, the light got released from that system, and it's still hanging around now at a much lower temperature, but with that characteristic signature of light and matter perfectly coupled. But there's still open opportunities there, as we talk about in the book. For example, when we predict what nuclear reactions in the early universe will create in terms of the species of the elements, we get helium about right, we get deuterium about right, 1 proton, 1 neutron. We get helium-3 about right, but then we get lithium wrong by a factor of about 3. So we're not miles out, but it's still enough.
Lithium is really important to some of us.
Yeah.
But if some other theory, this is the point, if you can buy your ticket on all those other pieces of data, you can then swoop in, explain that lithium better, and then you'll have one up on the Big Bang. What you can't do is just ignore all that other stuff, try to explain the lithium problem, and think that you've made some progress.
So I also note that there is the presence, as I said in the book, of counter-revolutionaries, of those in the past who have done a great service in cosmology. I would say orthodox cosmology, like Jeff Burbidge, like another pioneer who was also at UCSD, Nobel Prize winner, Alfvén, who had a model of the universe, plasma cosmology. We're going to go over that. You're going to give it your grade. And, if you look at it from outside the physics perspective, of orthodox physics perspective, it's sometimes tough for even a professional physicist like us, or astrophysicist or astronomer like the three of us, to really, how do we separate out the genius from kind of the dross? For example, Fred Hoyle, who we all know and you guys talk extensively in the book about, he made tremendous contributions. Some say he should have won the Nobel Prize, shared it with Fowler, for nucleosynthesis within elements. And yet he maintained till his dying day that the universe was a manifestation of a cyclic quasi-steady state model, he called it, but nowadays we'd kind of refer to it as a type of cyclic model, or perhaps as an eternally reproducing universe. And we have models like that. They're promulgated by people by the name of Linde and Guth. How do we separate out, Geraint? How do we separate out the kind of dross from the wheat? How do we know when even an eminent scientist who's proven his mettle, no pun intended, get that, guys, with Hoyle, but how do we know that this person's gone into crank land or not? How can we tell as professional physicists?
Well, so look, I've been in this game for a while, and I've met a lot of very smart people, and some of the most intriguing ones are the ones who are not only smart but have a lot of ideas, right? And Fred Hoyle was definitely one of those that had ideas from as you said, from the genius almost to the crackpot, or even into the crackpot with some of his stuff to do with life from space, etc. I think if you've got somebody like Hoyle who's putting something forward, you've got to take it seriously, and you've got to take a look at it. But then it's this question of how does it do when, confronted with the evidence of the universe? And of course, for Fred Hoyle and steady state, the wheels started to come off that very, very quickly, because, in the 1950s, there was the first observations of the deep universe, and it was realized that the distant universe is not the same as the nearby universe. And clearly there's evolution going on. And what you saw is that Fred Hoyle was jerry-rigging at some stage and shoring up his ideas by introducing components that didn't make the model any simpler. It just made it more complex to explain the observations. So, I think there's not just a simple one sieve you can apply and say this idea is crazy and this idea isn't. You've got to go through the stages of how does it compare against the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And when, of course, when steady state was first proposed, which was in the very late 1940s, it was on par essentially with the Big Bang idea, right? They in terms of the observations, they were on par. It was the observations that came later that caused the problems. So yeah, I don't think it's a one-step process. I like to take most ideas seriously, but yeah, they often fall apart when confronted with nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is one of the virtues. Although I think, so let's take a mental Gedanken experiment. You guys talk about these as well in this book. We're talking about the Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook with the two authors, Geraint Lewis and Luke Barnes, joining us well deep into the future. And this book really details a bunch of different ideas on how your theory, if it is to supersede the Big Bang, must adhere to or must explain as much as it does, but add on to it perhaps predictive power. But again, if we go back in time, a lot of the great breakthroughs were retrodictions. In other words, they were explaining things that were already understood. And I get a lot of these questions nowadays. I'm going to explain why there's three, generations of fermions or whatever, or why, hadrons divide into these two different classes. But in reality, a lot of it is sort of appealing to one of the theoretical virtues that I disagree with, which is listed in Keyes's paper, which I'll put up, and it is that it's an aesthetic virtue. It's essentially that it should be pleasure. It evokes beauty. Your theory T evokes beauty, which I couldn't disagree with more. Let me try to get to that on my preview screen here. Article, yeah, there we go. So here it is. I'm showing you. You guys can't see it, but it's the aesthetic virtues, of which there are three: beauty, simplicity, and unification. Beauty. The theory evokes aesthetic pleasure in properly functioning and sufficiently informed persons. So let's go back to 1604. There was a man named Kepler who made some contributions to our understanding of astronomy and physics, and even had a theory of everything, at least for the organization of the solar system. That was quite parsimonious. It was simple. It relied on Platonic solids. We can go back further. Frank Wilczek writes a lot about Pythagoras. He spends a lot of time talking about Pythagoras, whose H-index has not moved much lately, but is still nevertheless quite well respected. And then unifies, explains more facts than rivals with the same amount of theoretical content. Do you think that we are sort of overwhelmed by this notion of beauty or aesthetic pleasure in sufficiently informed persons? I'll start with Luke on that question.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. It's come into focus a bit more. Sabine Hossenfelder has been quite her book Lost in Math, or
yeah, she's been a guest on the show
elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, has sort of shone a light on this in particular because on the back of naturalness arguments and which seem like sort of beauty arguments, we're looking for supersymmetry using billions and billions and billions of dollars. So there's a lot at stake in that sort of in this discussion. I'd say these are theoretical virtues. These are not theoretical mandates. If you've got it, then that's all sort of ceteris paribus. It's all things being equal. I mean, you can't help as a physicist when you first see general relativity. You've got some hard work to do to get yourself up to the maths that you need to understand it. But it is a deeply, it's an amazing theory. It's a very beautiful thing. There's a quote from Einstein that if the data went against it, then he'd feel sorry for God or something like that. The theory is correct. The universe
Dirac
should
said
follow
similar
it.
things too, right?
But I think more than that. Yeah. So I think it's a virtue. I should say what Mike's doing in this paper is there's been a bunch of other papers, and he's a historian of science, not a philosopher of science, although he covers in that area, and not a scientist. He's trying to not say this is how science must be done, but what are the sorts of things that scientists themselves have presented as being, here's a reason to think my theory is a good theory. And so my theory is remarkably simple while still doing all the other things. Does seem to be a bonus.
Mm-hmm. And I want to take a little pause to advertise for the cause. I am I am actually being approached by advertisers to advertise on the Into the Impossible podcast. I have not yet accepted such remuneration, and I don't know if I will. But I do want to mention this book, which I am not being paid to endorse. I really love this book, The Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook, written by Geraint Lewis and Luke Barnes. I want to congratulate Geraint first, being selected as the Vice Chancellor's award-winning researcher at the University of Sydney. So congratulations for that, Geraint.
Thank you very much.
I saw that on LinkedIn, so congratulations. Yes. That's really cool. Now I want to do something that I don't normally do, but since sometimes we get some fun interactions, I want to ask you guys, I looked over your Amazon US ratings of the book. There's 38 reviews of your book, written or star reviews. I want to ask you if you'll play along in this game that I call high and low.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Absolutely. Well, I'll leave that in your capable hands.
That's how low. Oh, okay.
It's not bad.
I was stealing myself. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that.
As you said, I'd translate it into cricket language first, but other than that, I'm quite happy with it.
Oh, that's a bit of a minefield. As Luke mentioned, our previous book touched on that a bit more and received a broader range of comments. Look, the question of origins, where did we come from, and where are we going? Even I think that sparks interest in an awful lot of people, right? Even if it's if it's a religious or even just a scientific kind of question. Yeah. I'm going to pass over to Luke because I think he's thought more about this question than I have.
So to give the game away, I'm a theist and Geraint isn't. So in our last book, the final chapter was just a conversation between us about what we think all of this means, and no particular conclusions were reached. But well, it is a fun thing to chat about. Does Genesis invite people to develop their own cosmological models? Well, empirically, it's engineers who wanting to tell us what they think about the universe. Not specifically. Well, I don't specifically get religious people telling me that. As myself, I still don't get that. I don't get that. I'm getting.
Guys, hold on 1 second. I'm just gonna check. My audience is saying they don't hear it. They don't hear my side right now. I'm just gonna check my own feed here, the audio. To some it's a pleasure not to hear me. To others, it's a deep regret. Let's see. Let me put it on here. Got you back. All right, good. Okay, so I think I'm back. Okay, so sorry. So you were saying this theists versus non-theists necessarily, but Luke, you were finishing that up. And say, Grant, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I do. Actually, I think often it's the opposite. So what we get is people who don't like the notion of a Big Bang, as to them it mimics the story of creation, and at some level they think it's bringing religion to science by having this birth to the universe. And what we want to try to get across in this book, of course, is that it's really a scientific quest, right? It's a scientific question on where did the universe come from. Your interpretation and your inner beliefs, that in my mind is your business, but in terms of science, this is the way we understand the universe.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So let's get back to these theoretical virtues and vices. Maybe that would be another subject of the book. And getting back to this notion of whether or not somebody who is attempting to overthrow the Big Bang and what their motivation might be. That's something that always strikes me. I sort of feel like, I don't know if you guys play this game in Australia, Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know, is that a popular game down under?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's all right.
yeah, so then you have this notion like, or on Risk, when you beat somebody, you get like all their armies, you get their hit points or whatever in Dungeons and Dragons. It always seemed to me that if you were to, the notion that I get is if I overcome this guy Einstein, I'll sort of be more famous than Einstein. I will, if I displace him, I'll be the most famous person who ever lived in science because because the let's see. Hold on 1 second. I'm just making sure. Okay, good. So they can still hear me. Yeah. So I always wonder what is the sort of motivation for people that are already established. Like, for example, Fred Hoyle didn't win the Nobel Prize, like our guest tomorrow, Frank Wilczek. As long as we get to 15,000 subscribers in the next 9 hours, but nevertheless, he did have a tremendous amount of attention, respect, and even claimed evidence for the quasi-steady state, even going to his grave, believing that. And I should say I'm going to have on Jayant Narlikar in the next few weeks. He's one of Fred Hoyle's closest partners and collaborators, and he lives in India right now. He'll be on the show. We'll talk with him about some of the questions you raise. But they still believe it. In other words, it's gone beyond the notion of, well, there was this epoch at which the universe was steadily creating a tiny bit of matter. Now they claim that things like dark energy is really sort of a form of what they call the creation field. But you talk about that in the book. What do you say to people that have kind of, they're on the right track and maybe anticipated stuff like the accelerating expansion, but just won't let their theories be falsified, so to speak?
Well, for Fred Hoyle, it was the actual the birth of the universe that he didn't like. He didn't like this notion that the universe had a finite age, which is why he came up with this, the complete Copernican principle, or whichever one, perfect Copernican principle.
Perfect cosmological principle.
Yeah, that the universe is unchanging over time, and that was his motivation. He just didn't like the notion of the birth of the universe. And actually, when you talk to a lot of people, you realize is that a lot of it comes down to taste. A lot of people don't like relativity because at some level they don't understand it. Right, so this notion of expanding space in the universe, it doesn't make any sense to them. So something else must explain the universe, something they can understand. And you mentioned Alphen, right? So plasmas and electromagnetic fields, people sort of understand those, and this makes more sense than expanding space. So they want to base their cosmology on that rather than the sort of standard picture. So yeah, and of course the problem is that people are people. And no matter how we sort of separate the person from the science, we say that science is, there's no person in there. It has to come in at some level. So personal tastes and likes and biases feed into what people want to and don't want to accept.
So now let's take a look through the book. Again, I hate it when authors are asked to, essentially divulge the entirety of the book, and people are not encouraged to buy the book. I want everybody to buy this book, multiple copies. It's available on all different platforms, Amazon, as well as Kindle and audiobook too. At least I was able to find it. I want to go to some modern incarnations of ways to evade the Big Bang including the winner of the 2020 or co-winner of the 2020 Nobel Prize, Sir Roger Penrose, who was on the show last month, right after he won the Nobel Prize for his second.
So,
Luke.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I sort of think of these as being a prequel. So what we talk about in the book is the standard. Well, for the most part, we'll get on the later chapters talk about a bit more. But the standard in the past, the universe was hotter and denser theory, that Big Bang theory, the standard story. We have to extend that model back early enough that we get the predictions of the light elements correct. So when the universe is about a second old, it has a temperature.
Sorry, guys. Hold on 1 second. I'm losing
Sorry.
the camera one more time. What about now? Can anybody tell me? Can you hear me now? I am changing the camera. Do you hear me now? Let's see. Tap my mic. Sorry about this, guys. I have this fancy camera setup, and then it doesn't provide the most basic sound function. No, I hear it on here. I think it's fine. What about now? We do. Yes. Okay. Good. Sorry, Luke. Go ahead.
All right. So there's the standard story of the original trilogy of the way the universe was from when it was 1 second old to today. That's the story that the Big Bang. If we've got that bit of the story right, it predicts a whole bunch of stuff about the universe. What that offers is the chance then to write the bit beforehand. There's the standard story of the universe extrapolated before, say, 1 second-ish after the Big Bang. Or there's the inflationary models, which change that story. They say it didn't just have a very fast acceleration, it had an exponential acceleration at some point very early. And what Penrose is doing is he's writing a different prequel to the original novel. He's got a different set of prequels there. Alternative models to inflation are doing the same thing. The important thing about those is the reason they explain the data of the Big Bang Theory is that they, at about 1 second, they arrive back at the same point. A universe which is really hot, which has a certain ratio of light to matter, which has a certain amount of dark matter and dark energy. As long as you start, if you're thinking of whatever's, Lord of the Rings. As long as you get back to the start of the Lord of the Rings, the rest of that story will play out the same. You can then replace The Hobbit or whatever came before with your own story. But as long as you arrive back there, you're all right for what follows. So I tend to think of it that way. And so if these models, if they're not just going to be speculation in a part of the universe where we can't test them, they're going to have to provide something new, some new information, which is what Penrose is trying to do.
What about now? Let's see if I can hear myself now. Yeah, sorry about this, guys. We'll edit this out, before we send it to the BBC or the ABC.
For the DVD
can you guys
release,
hear me
it'll be a
now?
bonus feature.
I can't hear myself. So the problem is, I wonder if it's this camera. They say when I change cameras, they're not hearing. There we go. All right, now they're hearing me. Okay, now they're back. All right, good. All right, so what I was saying was we have this notion that cosmology can sort of explain how it itself came into existence. In other words, how the universe's initial conditions come to be. But cosmology doesn't really deal with that. Do you feel like people make that mistake very frequently? In other words, trying to understand how the initial conditions came into being is not really a part of the Big Bang itself, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's why we focused on things like explaining the observational evidence that we have in the universe around us. But that question of the instant, the birth of the universe, is really a separate question. And we find that, and look, it's partially our fault as scientists. We mash the words together without defining what we're talking about quite often. And there are people that don't like the notion of the initial singularity, whereas most cosmologists don't even think about it, right? That's not their day job. They're studying the universe around us. So they are separate questions, but they get mashed into one.
Yeah, Luke, what do you make of people that do want to really pigeonhole the initial conditions into the theory of the dynamics?
Well, I mean, this is the point that Wheeler was making was that there's no law of initial conditions. In every law of the universe that we found, it's a dynamical law. So it tells you how the universe changes, but not to that you have to add where it started from. So then you know how it changed, you know how it is. This is sort of true of every law we've seen. And so all that means is it's not that the initial conditions are just something we can't talk about at all. It's got to be a separate postulate. At some point you get down to the point where this is where I was confused in like first year physics, that the Schrodinger equation of quantum mechanics went up on the board, and you ask, where did that come from? And ultimately the answer is something like, well, from Schrodinger. He just thought that was a good idea, and then we thought, oh, what if the universe was like that? And then off we go. At some point there's no deeper derivations to be made. You just say, what if the universe was like this? And as a part of that, you have to say, what if the universe started off like this? Mm-hmm. So it's very important. This is the point we make in the book. There's the part of cosmology which is trying to use the model we have to try to predict the data that we see. When we talk about the singularity, we're not doing that sort of stuff. We're saying, here's the theoretical ideas we have. What if we push to them really hard towards the start of the universe? What might they tell us? And the answer to that has always got to be something speculative. There are some interesting clues there. It's a conversation we can have. It's just a very different thing from, can I explain some data?
Right. So I want to walk through a couple of other ideas that I took away from this book, but not before really visiting this topic that you brought up in the book, which is the kind of notion for the necessity of a grand unified theory, a theory of everything that unifies gravity with the other three higher energy forces. You do mention it in the book. It's not as prominent because it's not really a book about fundamental physics, but nevertheless, you do mention it in the context of both the Big Bang and in the context of black holes and singularities thereof. What do you assess right now the kind of a scorecard for theories of everything? There are so many of them. We've had on discussions over the summer, live streams about different theories of everything. There seem to be a lot coming out now, and the question is, why is that happening? What do you guys take? What's your take, Grant? Let's start with you. What's the take that you have on why is there such a proliferation of theories of everything? I'll give you my short thing, and then you guys can respond to it just as you will. But my feeling is we don't know that singularities exist at all in nature. In other words, there's no evidence of a singularity of an infinite quantity, let alone an infinite quantity that then smoothly transitions over time. As my kids say, I love you 2 times infinity. Well, half of infinity is still infinity, right? So once it cools down, from infinity, it's still infinity. So
the Big Bang infinity presents us with problems. The black hole, firewall prevents us from seeing the singularity that could be at the center of a black hole. So those are the only two contexts in which I'm aware of that we need a theory of everything. So what do you guys make of that? Why do you think there is so much effort put on marrying quantum mechanics to gravity when the two situations that I can think about aren't really ever going to be testable?
So I'll start with a story. I began my undergraduate degree in 1987 at the University of London, and one of my tutors was Michael Green, one of the fathers of string theory. And we were told in 1987 that any day now, string theory is going to crack it, and we will have a unified theory of gravity, etc. Here we are, 30 odd years later, and I feel that we haven't really moved on that far. And I'm starting to wonder if the proliferation of ideas is almost an act of desperation, in that there's been an awful lot of investment in strings and then brains and all these other ideas, and it is proven that very difficult to come up with a single unified theory that seems to explain everything. And we need it in cosmology because even though we ignore that instant of creation in the book, it's still a door that we want to look through. We definitely want to look back and ask the question, where did this universe come from? Is it a one-off, or is it part of something bigger? And until we can work out how gravity and the other forces play nicely together, we have that theoretical wall at twiddle the Planck time or whatever it is that we cannot see through. And everything that's been done to date is effectively jerry-rigged. At some level, we've shoehorned gravity and the other forces together to peer what we think we're peering through the door. Mm-hmm. But we really want to open it and ask the question where the universe came from.
So I'm getting a question from one of my dedicated listeners, Simon Farmer. And Simon's asking, how long after the Big Bang, which he may mean the origin of time, as Hawking would refer to it, how long after the Big Bang is a theory considered part of the Big Bang theory? A second, a year, the epoch of reionization or recombination? When should we rightfully consider adding on to the Big Bang and trying to revolt against it? Luke?
So for me, and I'm taking this from Martin Rees actually, it's
upcoming
the initial
guest on the show. Upcoming guest.
Oh, very good. Yeah, he's fascinating. For me, it's the initial conditions of nucleosynthesis. So wherever you need to start your story of the universe, and in the standard model, it's about a second-ish after the beginning, in order that you then calculate the nuclear reactions that happen during that first 3 minutes or so, and at the end of that, you get your predictions for the abundance of the light elements in the universe. That's sort of the first point where there's a relic of that part of the story. There's the story we tell of that first 3 minutes, and the leftovers of that is all the helium in the universe around us. So for me, that's anything that happened before then doesn't leave really a relic so much. As I said before, as long as you arrive at 1 second in the sort of state that the standard story tells, you should be okay. So for me, that's the sort of cutoff point. Mm-hmm. If we found a relic from even earlier, say a background of neutrinos, a gravitational wave background, then suddenly the story that we can actually test in some sense directly, or it's a long time ago, so it doesn't seem very direct, that's the start of that story would go even earlier. But things like inflation, again, are sort of part of that prequel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with Luke. This start of nucleosynthesis, that's where we're confident. But as you push back, the number of questions just keeps increasing. Our uncertainty keeps increasing. So we, at some point we've got to hit the question of, where did the baryons come from, and why is there the number of baryons in the universe today, and all those kind of questions. You push back further, and it just becomes more uncertain. So, it's not like there's a dividing line, like this is certain and this is just all speculation. It just becomes murky and misty as we go back.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you point that out. And, again, your book is unique, Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook. because it really goes through a checklist, and we'll go through a scorecard in the last few minutes. I did this most recently with Shelley Glashow, so you guys are in good company. Of course, his book is significantly older than your book, but so there's more time for F's to accumulate, as did happen with my report cards, or as you blokes would say, marks, I'm sure. But not the marks that were normally thought of as this fist in the Revolutionary Handbook, right? That's a different marks with an X. Just kidding, folks. I want to go back to this notion of like, when does it start? When does the Big Bang start? So you're one of the folks who wrote your approbation, or your blurb, as we say, the Sean Carroll. And Sean has a particularly nice, concise way of saying, what is the Big Bang? It's not necessarily the origin of time. It's sort of the end of our ignorance. So going backwards from today, when can we go back as far as we can until we can't say with certainty what conditions in the universe were like? And for me, that's the Big Bang, era of the Big Bang nucleosynthesis, which, Luke, you pointed out. It seems to me, and it just kind of struck me just now as the three of us are chatting, is that the people that have a problem nowadays and want to do revolution, it's really against inflation. And as Luke, you said, if you were to obtain, actually both of you guys said this, evidence from some other messenger, may that be gravitational waves. Hopefully, again, as you guys point out, there's a certain cosmologist by the name of Brian Keating quoted in the book, but nevertheless, we could have evidence of a different type of phenomena that would give either more credence. I would say that maybe you guys agree. If we discovered the cosmic neutrino background, that would bolster the Bayesian confidence in the Big Bang, hot Big Bang. It wouldn't do anything for cosmogenesis, though, the way that gravitational waves would. What do you guys think? Do you think the problem that people have, like Penrose and Steinhardt and Turok and others, is with the Big Bang, or is it with inflation?
I think it's a little bit of both, isn't it? I mean, for some people, again, people are people. For some people, inflation is one of those things that they feel it's rock solid. It's something that happened to the universe. But to others, it's somehow some sort of add-on, right? It's some sort of almost ad hoc addition that solves some problems that might not actually be problems. So I think there is a little bit of still unease around the question of inflation, because there is no slam dunk, this is the evidence that conclusively demonstrated that we had a period of inflation. So if we don't have inflation, then we still have questions around the properties of the universe, the flatness, horizon, which may or may not be problems that you still need to address. And I think that's what, where Steinhardt is coming from. And also, with regards to Roger Penrose, I mean, I haven't looked at what he's done. We know his mind is somewhat different to ours, right? To him, everything's a geometric shape. And for him, it makes sense to join singularities to singularities in a geometric sense. And that's the sort of basis of his picture. I think some people just feel uncomfortable with the lack of concrete evidence of inflation. So you do need to have some sort of alternative to explain the properties of the universe we see around us.
Mm-hmm. So I want to close before we get to the rubric, and I want to have time to cover some of my favorite ways to beat the Big Bang. Maybe your next book will be about theories of everything, in a sense that, almost every day, and I make this joke, probably too often than I should, but I get all these emails about theories of everything, but nobody ever proposes an experiment of everything. It's like, and I wondered, I was thinking about that today. Is that because, and then this is not to denigrate my, some of my best friends are theorists. They call me their plumber or electrician. I'm fine with that as long as you can handle my questions. But the point being that a lot of it is that there's a supply and demand problem. It's easier. It just happens to be true. It's easier to create a theory than it is to build an experiment. It's no doubt about it. And I'm wondering if there's a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit or data that is already been collected. You guys give this wonderful link to this program, which I wasn't aware of, and I was only dismayed that it wasn't available on my iPhone, this Alter Big BBN, where you can change BBN, Big Bang Nucleosynthesis code, which has been around since my friend and former professor at Stanford, Bob Wagner, and his team were doing this in the 60s, and he's still going strong. He was an influence, really strong influence in my career. But you have to agree with it. It doesn't matter what you do in your theory. You have to agree with BBN, at least except for lithium. Again, more important to some of us than others. But the point being, there are ways to test it and compare to actually existing data. So my concern is, when somebody emails me something, what should I give them? Should I give them, besides telling them to buy your book and go online to get Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook, which is a phenomenal book? What else should I do? Should it be, can you rederive all the literature? Do you understand all the literature? Certainly that's a prerequisite. But again, people like Alphen, Burbidge, Hoyle, they were pretty conversant with the literature. So what should we do as sort of practicing physicists with a desire to do outreach and communicate with the public? They pay our taxes. Sorry, they don't pay our taxes yet. Their taxes pay our salaries, right? At least I'm a public employee. I assume you guys are at some level as well. Anyway, what should we do? We get an email, theory of everything, alternate to the Big Bang. Step one. What do I tell them?
Well, Sorry, Luke.
Well, you started off with buy our book, which is, of course, the right answer. So I think, as you mentioned this before, and this was quite important to us, that we weren't just saying, we're the scientists, you're the layperson, let us handle this. The point of the book is, look, there's a way that science works. It's a human activity, so it's never going to be perfect, but it's not arbitrary either. Here are the rules. Here's why we do what we do. Here's why we publish. Here's why we go and talk to other scientists. Here's why we use mathematical models. Here's the data that we're after. All right, that's the game, okay? If you want to play the game, there it is. If you don't play it properly, we're going to ignore your work, not because there's some sort of arbitrary rule there, but because you're not explaining the data, or you haven't actually made predictions or something like that. There's an important lesson there with Bob Waggoner, actually. I don't know him personally like you do, but his supervisor he worked with Hoyle, right?
Yeah.
So this is the point we make in the book. Hoyle understands the Big Bang, not just his own theory. He understands the Big Bang theory well enough that he can work with a student to make the predictions of the Big Bang theory for it. So there's an idea behind the Big Bang theory which is precise enough that regardless of what you think about the theory, you can at least derive its predictions. Mm-hmm. This is something we so often don't see from the people who email us. We see someone with an idea that's entirely in their own head, and no one else in the universe explains it, understands it except for them.
All right. I just want to ask my audience while you're listening to this. So leave a thumbs up. First of all, subscribe, please, if you haven't. But leave a thumbs up if you've ever received an email or a comment or a question about a theory of everything or a new model for the Big Bang, and leave a thumbs down if you personally out there have a theory of everything and or a theory of how the universe may have started. Grant, what's your take on kind of where do people start after buying your book in audio and listening to it and reading it in physical form?
Where do they start? Well, I think the starting point has to be understanding the lay of the land today. What we often find is that people are focused on observations and measurements that were, people still present Hubble's original 25 galaxies to us and just say, how can you conclude that the universe is expanding from this data? Without realizing that in the intervening almost 100 years, we've now observed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of galaxies. So it's understanding where we're at and realizing that cosmology is no longer focused on really redshifts and quasars, but there are other places where the worries are. What we're worried about is the small scale universe. What happens with regards to individual galaxies and the processes and dark matter in galaxies, and that question of the birth of the universe. So what cosmologists are focused upon are not necessarily the data that these people are looking at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm asking my readers now, my listeners now, they are actually tweeting and thumbing up and thumbing down, so I've gotten some good thumb. Until now, we had an unblemished streak of 25 thumbs up, but now we're getting some thumbs down, boys. I'm sorry to tell you that. I'm going to read you some names of some theories of everything, some alternate cosmological models, and without going into them, I want you to tell me if this is from a crank or a legitimate scientist. First one, a rotating universe, a revolutionary theory of everything, a brief history of timelessness.
So a rotating universe, that was his name
Gödel.
just Gödel. That's right.
Yes,
That was
very good, Luke.
Gödel's birthday present to Einstein.
Yes.
Who
This
discovered.
is in our last book.
Yeah. So that one is a real cosmology, but it doesn't look like it fits our universe. It also has time travel in it, which would make it pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
So that was the first one. The second one was.
Oh, I haven't gotten to the second one, but yes, that was.
Oh, that
Gödel.
was one long title. Wow.
Yeah, that was one long title, exactly. And he actually
awesome.
says that is the universe rotating yet? Is the last question Gödel asked on his deathbed. So pretty cool.
So it's kind of interesting that observers are still looking for signatures of a rotating universe.
Yeah.
People are looking for polarization of distant sources to see if there's a rotation signature.
What's more bizarre, that a rotating universe or the multiverse?
I guess if there's a multiverse, some of them have got to be rotating. So
Yeah.
that makes the multiverse weirder.
Yeah.
So when I talk about that, also I'll be talking to Lord Martin Rees, the Astronomer Royal, who will read my horoscope as he does for the Queen. He promises me. He came up with an anisotropically expanding universe, so it's really not that far away, and that's actually how he came up with the idea for CMB polarization. So again, folks, stay tuned. Please subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. If I get to 15,000 subscribers in the next 3 minutes, I will have a live chat, your opportunity, and you blokes included from Australia. You'll get up super early, 9 a.m. Pacific tomorrow, and you will be able to live chat with a Nobel Prize winner, Frank Wilczek, who's a wonderfully interesting human being. I'll talk to him about some of his notions, because he is one of these people who, like Grant's professor back in Cambridge, I guess he said, was predicting and promising supersymmetry, string theory, all sorts of other things, even in his most recent book. So it's quite fascinating to do that. I want to go through really quickly in the remaining 2 minutes that we have left some other models. So we talked about the plasma cosmology. I want to talk about these kind of models that don't feature an inflationary epoch, but also don't have the Big Bang. So or don't have a singularity within them. And that is things like the conformal cyclic cosmology, or perhaps the Steinhardt's model of the bouncing cosmology, which has a classical transition from previous cycle to current cycle. When we think about these models, they don't feature inflation. That's sort of their virtue. They can be falsified. That's a virtue, right? If we observe gravitational waves, neither one predicts gravitational waves. And even Penrose claims we've seen evidence, so-called Hawking points. I've disputed with him on our interview. When we think about these alternative ways the universe could have begun, if you had to hedge your bets, ways other than the Big Bang, before we get to the final couple of ones that I'm going to bring up that I'm interested in reviewing, what one has sort of the most appeal to each of you? I'll start with Luke.
So I have a friend who's a quantum cosmologist at Cambridge who points out that science proceeds in a really interesting way. It proceeds by publishing things that they think that other scientists will find interesting. And so where you have these theoretical models, sometimes they're just there because so the singularity theorems, that what Penrose and Hawking are famous for, are kind of, if you want to have a model that doesn't have a singularity, you have to jump through these hoops and backflip over this and then do that. And so there's an interest there for, if you're a theorist, to go, well, watch this, and then they produce a model which backflips over and then jumps through the hoop and through the fire and all this sort of stuff. So I think these models are interesting. Sometimes they're just sort of a proof of concept. Hey, look, I can avoid a singularity theorem. But having said that, again, for what we were focused on in the book, as long as you get back to the standard story, you can write your own prequel. And as long as it produces predictions that are in some sense novel, you might have a chance of actually doing something that's better than the Big Bang, or having your prequel become part of the canon, part of the real story, of actually extending the Big Bang picture in some sort of way.
And Grant, what would you choose if you had to bet your Aussie dollars?
Well, look, I don't mind the multiverse picture, to tell you the truth. I do think that, to me, it helps me sleep at night to think that this universe is one in a chain of of universes. We came from some pre-existing structure. There will be some structure after us, whatever after means. I don't find the notion of an initial singularity in the start of time particularly comforting. So I like to think that we're just part of something bigger.
Uh-huh. And last thing before we get to this final scorecard, which I definitely am going to do, I have a question from one of my friends, Roger Perlman, another Roger P. And he's talking about, and he brings up the point about the Hubble tension. So as you know, we have a great deal of anxiety as cosmologists, which is why we're so interested in lithium. I'll stop making that joke. But the point being that we have all these controversies, so to speak. I actually had a so-called Great Debate Part 2 with Wendy Friedman, Adam Rees, Sarah Seeger, Jana Levin, David Spergel, and we talked about this, pretty radically sized, 5 sigma, discrepancy between measurements of the Hubble constant, early times, late times. And on the back of the book, you guys talk about, why should we trust these cosmologists? Big Bang, everything started in the Big Bang, invisible dark matter, invisible dark energy, Hubble tension. We have all sorts of other, possible controversies that could arise. Why do we trust it? It's got, kind of some bizarre features to it. Unlike, say, quantum electrodynamics. It's not like, all of a sudden there's a quantum electronic elf. And the elf is what's doing the Feynman diagram sorting. We don't have that. It's not like extremely precise 12 decimal places and then all of a sudden this wacky kind of bolt-on thing like wormholes and parallel universes. We don't have that in other branches of much more kind of conventional physics. So how do you address the skeptic who says you guys don't even know what 99% of the universe is made of, and you got these crazy ideas that are off by 120 orders of magnitude? Luke, what do you say to such a skeptic, a revolutionary?
So what we say is go and do better. One of the points we make in the book is no one's really that happy with dark energy. So dark matter and dark energy especially. So we keep seeing, the comments that there's a conspiracy amongst cosmologists. They want to preserve their existing theories. I think my impression is we'd all throw dark matter away tomorrow if we had a better model. It's just we're not going to make a move from a model that works, even if there's bits of it we don't understand, to no model at all. That's not a move we're ever going to make. Like, you got to show us somewhere better. We're not just going to jump into a vacuum and just float free for a while. That's what I'd say. I mean, yes, there are problems. The reason we're here is because we don't have a better solution. But if you've got one, for heaven's sake, tell us.
And okay, so let's finish up by the kind of rubric, the scorecard that you guys mentioned. I'm going to try not to lose my screen, and this is risky, or lose my audio. So people tell me if I lose the audio, but I do want to do this. I'm going to add in sharing my screen. These are the 10 ways to beating the Big Bang and building a better universe. Are you guys okay if I put this in the show notes? Because what I'm going to propose is that I use this and I ask my audience to come up with a version of this, an analog of this, but for theories of everything. So hopefully you guys will do a great service to physics, and let's review it as it's presented on the screen. First, number 1, the rules according to Lewis and to Barnes. 10 steps to beating the Big Bang and building a better universe. Know your enemy. Let me see. First, let me ask, can you guys hear me out there? Hear me still? Okay, great. Number 1, know thine enemy. Learn the mathematical model that undergirds the Big Bang Theory. 2, prepare your rival. Your theory of the universe needs to be precisely formulated, ready for anyone to use to predict data. Number 3, Olber's paradox. You guys spend a great amount of time, and importantly and appropriately so, on Olber's paradox. Has to explain why the night sky is dark. 4, redshift and distance. Why do we observe the light we receive from distant galaxies? Almost always redshifted, and why the redshift increases proportionately to distance. Next, fading light. Explain why supernovae fade more slowly and why galaxies are dimmer when their light is more redshifted. Explain the CMB and why it has a near perfect blackbody spectrum. You don't, as I point out, as you point out, you don't make it mandatory that theorists predict the value of the temperature that we observe today. That's not even part of the standard Big Bang model. And I note that, it's often not really brought up. I don't remember if you guys mentioned it or not, but that the companion paper by Dickey, Peebles, Roll, and Wilkinson was my grand advisor, was basically never mentions the Big Bang once. That paper, which is a companion and explanation, now they're saying they lost the audio. So I'll go back to this. I'm just going to keep reading it. I'll put it in the show notes. Let me see if I can hear myself here. I apologize again. Let's see here. No, I can hear it. I don't know what they're talking about. But anyway, getting back to this, we the final ones after the CMB, which is the only point I was making, is that was never predicted by Dickey, that the Big Bang had to be responsible for the temperature seen by Penzias and Wilson. In fact, they talk about a previous cycle in that paper, so the cyclic universe was still very much in vogue. Cosmic 07 explained the Lyman alpha forest. Of course, Art Wolf was my late colleague. Art Wolf was a professor here. UCSD has a lot of good kind of cranky cosmologists, but also some outstanding ordinary cosmologists, mainstream cosmologists. Ryan Cookie was here, etc. Do better. Cosmic oven. Why does the universe have the essential parts that we observe it? Essentially the BBN predictions. We want to make sure we understand why that is. And the amount of deuterium. Do better. Outdo the Big Bang. Explain the lithium abundance that we see in the universe. And folks like David Teitler, who is also at UCSD, have looked into this problem, trying to understand it. The last one may be controversial with some of my friends, like my good friend Eric Weinstein, who's coming to visit soon. We might do a live stream. If we hit 16,000 subscribers by Friday, Eric and I will do a live stream on this channel for you guys to ask questions of. Last one, publish. Publish your theory. Expose it. Let it be vulnerable. And I think I agree with that. Some people, though, say, sometimes theory is tentative and provisional, and we need to, kind of protect it before publicizing it to the world. But I want to thank you guys for publicizing your wonderful book, The Cosmic Revolutionaries Handbook, with the world. Where can we find you guys on Twitter? First of all, Luke, Garant, where can we find you guys on Twitter? And what else are you up to next? What's your third book going to be about?
Okay, so I'm at cosmic_horizons, Luke.
And I'm at Luke Barnes Astro. And well, we've got some ideas for the next book. One of them would be about symmetry, because this kept on coming up in our previous books, that the universe seems to have a sort of love-hate relationship with symmetry. Some of the ones we can imagine are out there, and some of the ones we can imagine are not the way the universe is. So yeah, just sort of explaining that.
Very good. Well, I'd love to hear about that. Yeah, the book by Frank Wilczek that I'm talking about tomorrow is a beautiful question.
No, I've lost your audio, Brian.
Oh, you did? Okay. So I think I know why it's happening. Can you hear me now? Now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're back.
Good. So hopefully people out there can hear me as well. I want to just conclude by saying I've really enjoyed having you on the Into the Impossible podcast. I'm going to encourage people to like this video, comment, subscribe, etc. Please share the channel with as many people as possible so we can do a live chat with Frank Wilczek tomorrow and possibly Eric Weinstein on Friday. I want to thank my friend Miguel for making this wonderful intro-outro music that I'll play in a second. Miguel is at Yeti Tears on Instagram and on Twitter. And I want to thank you guys for a wonderful interview, and I wish you the best of luck, and may we all continue the revolution. The revolution will be pushed on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Guys, take care.
Cheers.
Impossible podcast with your fearful host, Brian Keating. Now getting ready to sign off and get ready for tomorrow. If you guys would do me the favor, subscribe, comment, and most of all, get as many subscribers as we can to the Into the Impossible Dr. Brian Keating YouTube channel, so I can continue to attract amazing guests. As I mentioned, I've got Kamran Vatha That's already recorded. You guys will get that whether you subscribe or not. I hope you will subscribe. And but also Frank Wilczek, he's going to be on at least twice. He's got a new book coming out, but tomorrow I'm going to talk about his previous book, A Beautiful Question. And that's really been a phenomenal book for me to read and go over. As I said, Eric Weinstein will actually be here in person, hopefully, as COVID test passes. He'll be here in my office on Friday, and we'll do a live stream together, maybe answering your questions. I'd love to hear questions that you might have. We might go deep. We might go in and talk about God a little bit more. But I really am encouraging him to actually publish stuff, and hopefully he will be working with me to advance geometric unity to the point where we can compare it to these theoretical virtues and also this checklist. I want to ask you all out there to do me a favor, besides sharing this channel with as many people as possible. Take a look in the comments in the YouTube description text box. I pasted, they allowed me to cut and paste this wonderful checklist that they have. I'm going to put it in the box as we speak. And what I want you guys to do is to do the same as they've done, but not just for theories of how the universe could have started in contrast or contradistinction to the Big Bang, but do it for theories of everything. Because I get an awful lot of people writing me about their theories of everything, and I love looking at them and reading them, although I wish that they would present them not to my email account, although you should join my email list, but don't send me your theories of everything because I don't have much time for that, but to read and respond. I literally get 3 or 4 a day, and they're usually like 5 to 10 pages long. So please do not do that, but you can reach out and perhaps make sure that your theory of everything passes these tests before you do it. And these tests are going to be in the YouTube description as we are speaking. I just put it in there. This is for the Big Bang, but do the same for me, please, for theories of everything. Before you send me a theory of everything, do the same, kind of run through the same checklist before sending it off. And it'll save you some trouble because it's always good to get feedback before you actually go live and expose your theory to criticism. It's rare that some theory gets published and everybody just wants to go out and measure it and perhaps dedicate years of their career, because we all have only a limited amount of time to do the research that we do. On the other hand, I find it somewhat surprising that more people don't look at existing data sets to compare their theories with. I'll put a link to this alternate BBN calculator. So now I'm going to add a kind of a trick in my parsing of different proposals for Big Bang alternatives, and I'm going to add in that you have to explain what the abundances of these different elements are. And so I'll put in a link to the alter BBN, this code that you can download for free. Unfortunately, I think it's only C. But maybe one of you guys will convert it into, some Python script that we can run in a Jupyter notebook or something like that. Those are all really cool things to do. You can do a service, and you might get citations to it by working cosmologists like me. Anyway, for now, I want to encourage you all to please tune in tomorrow when I'll be talking to Frank Wilczek, who's an amazing, brilliant individual. And how often do you get to talk to a person, not like me, a loser, but a winner of one of these real Nobel Prize medallions? Frank's an amazing intellect. He writes for the Wall Street Journal. He's got some controversial ideas and some ideas that I think would make a nice counterpoint to what we just heard. Theories of everything and even the unification of all fundamental forces of nature. For now, I am signing off. Please share this and enjoy this next episode, this current episode, and our future episodes when we again will go into the impossible. I'll play the final song from my friend and yours, Yeti Tears, the Into the Impossible closing outro by Yeti Tears. Here we go. I'm going to put it up there. Thank you so much, Miguel, for making this lovely, lovely soundtrack for us to have.